Have the Liberals been buying elections with taxpayer dollars by giving special grants to the media during election years? And I'm not talking about the CBC here. Let's have a look. Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be taking a quick look at something that I came across last night. As many of you know, I normally talk about firearms law and the gun control conversation here on the channel. However, last night while I was on 338 Canada checking the polls, I happened across something a little unusual. And then I accidentally stumbled into a bit of a political rabbit hole, which I think might interest you guys. This is going to require a few minutes of backstory, but I promise that the wait will be worth it, so please stick around. So what I saw on 338 was this: Liaison Strategies. I had never heard of them before. And not only that, but they had the Liberals at a 4-point lead. But honestly, 4 points really doesn't amount to that much, so it's not necessarily a big deal. But being that they had never shown up at 338's polling before, that kind of made me wonder who they were. Now, as it turns out, they're actually not that new to the game, and they've done a fair number of provincial polls in Ontario. Liaison Strategies is a member of the Canadian Research Insights Council, but that's really not the story here. The story here is that Liaison Strategies did this poll on behalf of the National Ethnic Press and Media Council of Canada, who has received government grant money. And even that is only part of the story. So this is where things get interesting. I searched this group up on Google, and one of the first results from Google was this Government of Canada website. Now, I didn't set out looking for this kind of information at all, but search engines and algorithms being what they are, it decided this was going to be right up my alley. And it was right. So this government page ended up being the grants and contribution page for disclosing various government expenditures. Being that I had Googled for the National Ethnic Press and Media Council of Canada, the page had already searched out all of the grant money that they'd received from the government over the years, going all the way back to 2007. Now, I don't know if that's when the company applied for the first grants, or if this is just as far back as the record on this webpage goes, but none of that's really important. As we can see, during the entirety of the Harper years, this group received somewhere in the neighborhood of about $500,000 between 2007 and 2015. Which may sound like a lot, but honestly over that kind of time frame, that would barely even cover the cost of like a single employee. And then after Trudeau took office, they received a bit of a bump in the value of the grant, but honestly, even that amount of money in and of itself isn't exactly newsworthy for this government. And that came from the Canada Periodical Fund, which appears to have been set up in 2010, and over 10,000 grants have gone out since then under this fund to help various companies and organizations with the financial challenges of being a smaller newspaper or magazine agency. But again, this still isn't the story. Like, it's not exactly news that the Government of Canada has its fingers in the proverbial cookie jar here, so to speak. And it's also worth mentioning that this money is not the dedicated money that is given to larger government programs like the CBC. But still, this story isn't really about the Canada Periodical Fund either. So if we continue scrolling through the history of the grant money given to the National Ethnic Press and Media Council of Canada, we see that in June of 2019, they suddenly received a grant for $1.2 million. And that money is far more than the total combined funds that they had received over the previous 12 years. This money is not a part of the normal Canada Periodical Fund, but rather a newly formed fund called the Local Journalism Initiative. The purpose of this fund and the Canada Periodical Fund appears to be basically the same. The stated purpose of the Local Journalism Initiative is to help support news in areas where it wouldn't otherwise be financially viable to do so. And again, none of that money goes to the larger news organizations like the CBC either. So we see that on June 4th, this organization received a metric ton of money, which just so happened to be a little over 4 months before the next scheduled election happened on October 21st, 2019. Now you might be sitting there thinking, that election date was kind of set in stone, so there really wasn't any kind of way around it, so therefore it's really not that suspicious. Like, it's not like the government should be expected to suspend all grant money during election years. And, fair enough. So let's keep scrolling. In 2020, they received a few $100,000 more from the Canada Periodical Fund, which again, not exactly news. And then, in 2021, this is the real eye-opener. On April 1st, 2021, they suddenly received $7.8 million from the Local Journalism Initiative across 4 separate grants. And not only that, But some of these grants were dedicated to nonprofit organizations, and some of these grants were dedicated to for-profit organizations. But somehow, both of these types of grants were given to the same organization. So figure that one out. And then here's the real kicker. 2021 was never supposed to be an election year. The next election was actually scheduled for 2023 at this point. But then, astonishingly, surprisingly, and on a completely unrelated note to be sure, Trudeau spontaneously dissolved Parliament and called for his own election once again. Just 5 months after he gave out all this money. So this got me thinking. So far, we've only been looking at one organization who's received these funds. Maybe this has nothing actually to do with them. So I reverse searched the page for the Local Journalism Initiative and then sorted the results by year. The Local Journalism Initiative has only ever given out money in 2 years, 2019 and 2021. That just happens to be the previous 2 elections that were called by Trudeau. In 2019, this initiative gave $20 million out to various news organizations, and in 2021, that ballooned to nearly $70 million. And again, 2021 wasn't even supposed to be an election year. But Trudeau called a spontaneous snap election when his popularity started to increase in the hopes of getting his majority back. Where do you think that popularity actually came from? And to put $70 million into an election perspective, according to this article from The Hill, neither the Liberals or the Conservatives spent even $30 million on the election due to election spending limitations in Canada. Now, to be fair to the Local Journalism Initiative, much of this $70 million was given over the course of several years, so it wasn't exactly just lump summed in 2021 alone. But still, to believe that such spending from a single political party would have no bearing on their popularity, that's a bit of a leap. Now, there has been no new local journalism initiatives put out yet this year, but if we make it to April, I would bet that's going to change. But even without that, $10 million was set aside in 2024 to be rolled out this year that prioritizes the Liberals' diversity brand. And quoting directly from this government page, this initiative is aimed at supporting diverse communities and organizations, including Indigenous, Black, racialized, ethno-religious minorities, to us LGBTQI+, and persons with disabilities, which will allow Canadians to appreciate and understand Canada's diversity. So if anyone still has any doubts as to the motivation that's behind all of this money, let me leave you with one final observation. And I kid you not, you actually can't make this up. This new focus is literally called the Changing Narratives Fund. Yeah. Now again, being that I mostly discuss firearms and the gun control conversation here on the channel, politics and funding and grant money and most of the other inner workings of the government are still rather foreign to me. I really have no scope or context to gauge the importance or influence of this grant money. And it may actually be that this grant money really isn't all that suspicious in the grand scheme of things. Now, I don't really see how that could be true, given all that I've shown you, but I also don't know enough about this topic to know if I'm actually wrong here. So take everything I've said with a large grain of salt. And if any of you watching have more info on this topic, or have context to share with me so that I can become more informed, please let me know in the comment sections down below. But if nothing else, we can say for certainty that the National Ethnic Press and Media Council of Canada have received almost $8 million of your taxpayer dollars from the Liberal government. And now they are hiring Liaison Strategies to do polls which are, surprise, surprise, showing a Liberal lead. Go figure. All that being said, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.